once I made it in my mind, I'm an entrepreneur and my employer is my client.
Everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today we have Darien Claxton with us. We are super excited. We have known you for a while now, and I'll say it for you, so you don't have to say it. One of your claims to fame is Myron Golden always says, "Hey, this is one of my #1 affiliates."
Right, for sure.
But I'm super excited to learn more from you today and kind of hear what all the different things that you do. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. You guys are celebrities in my book, so being in the virtual space with you is a privilege. Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Darien. Well, one of the things we love to do on our show is kind of go like back in time before entrepreneurs were entrepreneurs, and kind of hear kind of your backstory and like where were you before you started doing things online and doing the entrepreneurial stuff? Like, what did you do? Who were you?
Or were you always an entrepreneur?
Or were you always an entrepreneur?
Kicked it off, came out of school and just started.
You're going to say come out of the womb.
Well, that too.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because my father is a CPA. He's been a CPA for as long as I've been alive. And so after school, most days I would go to his office, and that's where I would spend after school. I'll kind of be in a room, and I might do my homework, but he had me doing things. This is back in like the 80s, right? So we had these big clunky computers. So I was learning programming. I was learning. It wasn't Excel. It was Lotus 1-2-3, which ended up becoming Quattro, which ended up becoming Excel, word processing. And so I was getting these skills, but more importantly, I was getting the perspective of entrepreneurship. Now I was seeing both sides of it because I saw my dad and my mom worked with him as well. So it was kind of the family business. I saw the late nights, I saw I couldn't tell that they were stressed, but it looked like a grind to me. Yet it was attractive because I felt like whenever we did want to do something, we had the time to do so. So we didn't have a lot of money, but we had enough to get by. And I felt like this afforded a level of flexibility and being able to utilize these skills that I had learned from a young age. In my mind, I'm like, this is what I want to do. Right. So the first thing that I thought I wanted to do when I did go to college, went to University of Maryland, and then I ended up going to a Christian university in Huntsville, Alabama, where I ended up meeting my wife. Computers was where it was going to be because I had studied them, I'd learned them. I was an avid programmer from a young age, programming in BASIC and eventually Visual Basic. That's where I thought I wanted to be. But I thought I was going to have a career in it. So entrepreneurship was in the back of my mind, but I was more like, this is what my career is going to be around computers. And it was actually in the space of college and then transitioning to working at a job that the itch for entrepreneurship came. I was living in Huntsville, Alabama, graduated from school there, and I had made this declaration about the job that I was working at. This will be the last job I work at, because I had in my mind, again, being able to make my own schedule and being able to have my office space and set things up the way that I wanted. He could move a computer over here. Like, I want to move this over here. I want to do this. And I didn't see a level of flexibility at the places I worked at. I saw rigidity as it were. So in my mind, I finally got to the point like, this is going to be my last job. And I was selling on eBay. That was kind of like my first entrepreneurial endeavor. So I was working full time and I was selling like computer parts. I was selling, just whatever I could find. And that was going to be my business, going to do some drop shipping, as it were. And so in my mind, this was a path to living this life that I thought was so dreamy, as it were. But there were a lot of complications there. Obviously, a drop shipping business, particularly at that time, there's a lot of overhead, there's a lot of moving parts, and I just was not ready for all of that. But just to keep your question answered short, I had at a young age, I had in my mind, I liked the idea of entrepreneurship. My dad had done it. And matter of fact, when I got older, one of the things that my dad told me was, he said, don't be like me and not trust anybody to delegate. So he's been in business 30 plus years. He hired his first employee like 15 years ago. So prior to that, it was him and my mom doing everything. There was no trust in terms of like, hey, we're an accounting firm. If we have other people who are involved in the business, then we share some of the liability if and when they make a mistake. And in his mind, they could not do it as well as he could. And so he told me, as I started to move towards entrepreneurship and asking him questions, he was like, don't be like me, and make sure that you at least delegate. Even if you're not going to hire somebody full time, delegate, find contractors. So that was very helpful for me as I started my actual journey towards full time entrepreneurship.
So he was hustling and grinding because he didn't trust anybody else to help him.
Yeah, just pulling the late nights, bringing work home, not being able to scale, not being able to expand. And even now, like I just talked to him earlier this morning, he uh, finally quit his lease at his office. So he's been trying to retire and kind of let go for quite some time. But with accounting, you have repeat clients and you have this that comes up, and he feels a level of loyalty to these clients. I'm like, Dad, if you want to be done, like just do it, just be done. Right. And so he's talking to me about, all of the moving parts that he felt responsible for, particularly as a father. He's like, I have to do all these things. I cannot afford to pay overhead to somebody else that's coming from our coffers, as it were. And God forbid something goes wrong and I can't trust this person, then that's going to affect the family. So it wasn't even as much as his name being on the line as like him being a provider. These were threats. And now he realizes as he got older, those were actual, the threat was doing it all himself. But that's not something that he realized until later on in life.
That's so cool that you grew up with that perspective. Like that, like there's not like, I don't know how many people grow up as like a son or daughter of entrepreneurs, but like
as many as there are entrepreneurs.
Yeah,
so it's gotta be a decent amount, but like
that wasn't our experience. So I was like, that's kind of cool. But I bet you it kind of comes with, like you were saying, pros and cons too.
Yeah. Well, to me, it would be how many of them were successful entrepreneurs, right? Because my guess is some of them ventured off into it and then didn't make it as far as your father did. Your father is obviously successful.
Yeah.
He's still trying to close down his business. He hasn't done it yet because he still feels loyal to people. But a lot of people probably don't make it that far.
Yeah.
Right? And something happens, or they hire the wrong person, or whatever happens. And so a kid gets this bad perspective of entrepreneurship too, right? Because like, oh yeah, if dad had just done X, Y, and Z, because you have friends that were, their parents look successful because you're not living in that house. But anyway,
so
it's an interesting thought.
This wasn't my next question, but it's going to be now. So you had, your dad was an entrepreneur, you watched that, you had kind of mixed feelings. Like, so now you have a lot of kids in your life and in your home, right? Like, do you do anything specifically? Okay, I was a kid, like an entrepreneurial kid, and now I'm an entrepreneurial dad. Do you do anything specific because of that? Like seeing both sides, is there anything you do special with your kids?
So here's the thing, even though I grew up in that space, my dad didn't talk to me about entrepreneurship when I was a kid. And so I'm intentional now, especially spending time with Myron. Like I'm intentional about teaching my kids. My kids are reading his books and and so when they come in, it's not like, hey, I'm busy. I kind of got that feeling from my dad. I kind of felt like I was bothering him. So not like it was hostile, but we didn't have open conversations about that until I was much older. I was in my 20s and 30s, right? And so now the way that I approach my kids is, there's a level of guilt that I may feel because I'm always working. So I made sure I was intentional about the time that I spend with them, but also I'm not playing with my kids, right? So we play, but all of the time we spend together is building towards entrepreneurship. Like, so yes, they're going to school and yes, they're going to fill out their applications and things of that nature, but I want them in business now. So like my godson lives with us. Matter of fact, he came on one of Myron's challenges when he was on spring break. He had one day to come in. And so like we talk about business. I have him editing some of my videos, right? I had other video editors. I've trained video editors. They've come and go, so much attrition. So I'm like, let me pour into him because he wants to be a content creator and he wants to do all these things. So now our interactions with all of my kids, we make sure we incorporate some of those strategies. And so now they're asking me questions. So they come in and they see something. It's not like, oh, daddy's busy. It's like, hey, let me see what he's doing. Let me find out about that. And so we talk about Clickfunnels and we talk about pricing and we talk about value of service and integrity and scaling and all these concepts that I wish that I could have talked about when I was a kid. So I'm like, let me give that to them, and we both get better it's not just a one-way thing. Like mentorship is always two-way. So yeah.
That's so awesome.
That's a really good word. Because I think it's easy as a parent to get stuck in that trap of like, no, I'm working.
Yeah, I'm busy.
Right. And not,
we're guilty. We're guilty of that.
I'm very guilty of it, right? I'm in the middle of doing something. I have my headphones on and like I'm doing something.
And being
technical.
on the computer is very technical. You too. I mean,
you're doing something very technical, and it's easier to say, no, I'm working. I'll be there in a minute, or no, I can't do that, or whatever the question is, and you just kind of brush them off, and you try to teach like, no, I'm doing something. You can't just come interrupt me, instead of taking the time. So that's huge.
How old are you?
I appreciate that.
Yeah, so I have 2 biological kids and 3 godchildren that live with us. So my youngest is 5, youngest boy is 5, and then a 9-year-old boy, and then a 12-year-old girl, 16-year-old boy, and a 19-year-old girl who is actually away on internship, and she's in college. Gotcha. So yeah, so from 5 to 19. And here's the other thing. So I don't know if you or your listeners ever read the book, The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman, right? Most people are familiar with that. And so I actually have he has a framework for kids as well. Same 5 love languages: words of affirmation, acts of service, quality time, gifts, and physical touch. And so I was intentional. It's a great book. It's one for kids and one for teens. And so I was intentional about figuring out what my children's love languages were. And all of them, except one, my youngest, is acts of service. So I asked him, like, the trick is, do you think daddy loves you? Yes. Why does daddy love you? Why do you think daddy loves you? Because you do X, Y, and Z. So he said, because you make me nice food. I'm kind of the primary cook. All the other ones were quality time, right? And so them coming in and seeing me working, it would be very abrasive and very negative for their love tank if I'm like, oh, I'm busy. Are there times that, like, if I'm in a meeting, like if someone were to come in right now, like, hey, I'm not right now, right?
Right.
But I'm intentional about bringing them back through. Even last night, I think it was last night or a couple nights ago, my 9-year-old, it's way past his bedtime. He just finished a chore. He comes in, and I was reviewing some work. One of my animators had animated some logos for a new client. And my first instinct was like, hey, just go to bed. And then so I said, no, come take a look at this. And it's funny because we designed a logo for his YouTube channel. And we did some animations for it as well. And so he understood the process. Hey, come take a look at this. It was only like 5 minutes, right? But that quality time filled his love language, his love tank, and created hopefully some understanding more about the value of entrepreneurship. So yeah, I think that whatever your kids' love languages are, if you can incorporate, that into, if you're trying to balance as an entrepreneur or trying to balance as a career person, understanding what the love languages will speak volumes to their development.
That's really good. Well, so with that, we were just talking about like, hey, Zach, like, does a lot of technical stuff. I know you do like a lot of computer ads and technical, like a lot of it's on the computer, and it requires skills that you have to develop over time. Like, what do you do with like a 9-year-old or a 6-year-old? And you just gave an example, but if you can expand on it, that'd be awesome. Like, what do you do with a 9-year-old or a 6-year-old that you're like, I want you to understand and be a part of business, and I want you to like want to do this, but their skill level, obviously, like they may or may not be capable of it yet. Like, how do you kind of like integrate that, and like, what do you do does that make sense? Sure.
Well, the first thing is not underestimating their abilities.
True story.
Right? I mean, their abilities now, like when we were growing up, obviously there was a big learning curve for technical things. It's natural for them, right? So giving them responsibilities, it might challenge them, and understanding that they have more of an affinity for these things. So for example, I'll have like my 9-year-old say, hey, here is Wondershare. It was one of our video editors that we use. Just go ahead and just do a project, like create something, right? And whereas I would have needed some more guidance at his age, he's able to kind of figure things out. Now, I've also worked with him, so he's seen me edit videos before. So he's got that, but I want to give room for their own creative development. I want to give room for them. And so it's within the parameters of giving a project, right? And so if I want to get my kids involved in something, it's like, here is something small that you can work on. Just have at it, and then let me see what you do with it. right? So I had my 16-year-old who's now one of my primary video editors.
And Your 6-year-old or 16?
16.
Oh, yeah,
16-year-old.
Right.
16, right. And he had no experience editing videos, right? But again, we live in an age where there's so much information available online. You don't go to the library. You don't have to research a bunch of stuff. So it's more about teaching your children how to find the information that they need, right? So someone's going to come from me, but I've got to give room. First of all, if I've got a busy schedule, I can't be spending a ton of time teaching, right? If I can create an environment where here's where you go to look, here's some forums you can check out, here's some YouTube channels that are very helpful. And now I have a project with some defined parameters where they are able to work and they're able to put their own creativity into it and then come back for some affirmation and we can talk. And I'll usually do a compliment sandwich, right? So usually, because these are technical things, there are going to be a lot of things they miss. So I start with a compliment. Wow, I really like the transitions that you used here, right? This part right here, you cut off, you cut them off too much. So I'm not hearing what they're saying at the ends of these cuts, right? So it's very important to get everything. But I like how you ended it. I like the clips that you chose, right? So the compliment sandwich affirms their efforts in tackling something that's very technical that at that age, when I was that age, I probably would not have been able to do, right? So that's kind of one of the ways that I'm able to get them involved early. And once they have the affirmation and they see a finished product, there's more impetus for them to continue that versus feeling like it's a chore or it's busy work or they're going to get scolded for it or it's just not going to be any good. Like those are ways I'm finding work with us.
And you let them kind of practice on stuff to start with, like just let them play around with stuff. Yeah.
They have also, when I had, I didn't tell the story how I became a full-time entrepreneur, but I had, back in Arizona, I had office space and I had computers that now they're using. So these are kind of older computers that still work. And so like, I don't feel bad about them messing things up or really going all in, like experimenting with it as it were. So giving them room to mess up, room to play around, room to experiment is very encouraging in their development.
So I want to hear your story of how you became a full-time entrepreneur. That was my next question. But just as a sidebar, you could totally, like, in all your spare time, Darien, you could totally do a class on like how to teach work with your kids. How to involve your kids in entrepreneurship. Like that is like really good stuff.
That sounds like the next book.
It does. I know you got one. Like what you got one book out, right? What's your other book that you
Yes, Bending Bows of Bronze. It's a devotional on spiritual warfare based on the book of James.
Oh, that's awesome.
I also have another book on Amazon about Facebook compliance. So it's No More Rejected Ads. So that was my second book.
So you're going to have one about, teaching your kids entrepreneurship because it's something we struggle with. And we only have one kid, Darien. We have one and we still struggle with it.
So here's the thing. It's funny.
We should be better than this.
It's funny, not to get too preachy because I'm a man of faith. I do believe that a lot of times we wait for a testimony to be completed before we give the testimony. I'm guilty of that myself. So where it's like, do I feel qualified to write a book about entrepreneurship for kids when they haven't yet started their business and they haven't yet done these great things, right? But I know there is value in the process. So at the very least, I should be documenting some of these things with the plans to create something that's instructional for parents. But people do want some credibility. Like, why am I going to learn it from you as a parent if your kids haven't done anything? Like, what have your kids done entrepreneur-wise? It's all theory until we see some results. You know what I mean?
Except for the fact that you already taught us something. Because I was going to say, even if it's not the actual, they went out and became an entrepreneur, but what do you do as a parent who is an entrepreneur with your kids if that's your desire? Right. Like, because our son's 9 as well, 9.5. And sometimes we want him, our desire similar to yours is that he help in the business and do video editing and stuff, but he's not there yet. And so then I guess it goes to Myers' principle. You just have to be one step ahead of him. So you're one step ahead of us.
And I mean, the reality is if he doesn't become an entrepreneur, that's fine. But if I raised him in a way that he's able to do critical thinking and other things like that, because of different, how we raised him, then it's a win anyways. Yeah. Right. I'm not necessarily looking for, he's going to be an entrepreneur. He can be whatever he wants to be. Right. It'll be his choice. But knowing that as an entrepreneur, I did the best I could because our life looked different than most people's, right? Because we're home all the time.
And that's what he did. He was like, at least our family had freedom and flexibility and time, which you notice which brings us back to your story of you were stuck in a job after college and everything. And then like, tell us a little bit of like, what job were you in? Why'd you want out? How'd you get out?
The last job.
The last job.
Yes. Yes. Or what I claimed would be the last job. Yes. What's interesting is I'm in marketing now, and I didn't realize I was using marketing skills all throughout my professional experience, because I graduated with a degree in computer information systems. I wanted jobs in programming. I was never hired for those jobs. I had to market myself to get into those positions. So for example, I worked at LG Electronics. The job that I thought was gonna be my last job, I was working at LG Electronics in Huntsville, Alabama, and they initially hired me as a temp to be on the phones. Right? And this is a person with a college degree, and I couldn't find a job in my field. And here it is, I'm going to be on the phones, and I hated it. I was there for 2 days. Like, this is terrible. And so what I did was I analyzed the needs. And so I saw they had needs. They were, so all these data analysts, they're wasting all this time crunching numbers all day. It's a Korean company. And so they're very process oriented. So it's like, you're going to come in and you're going to run these reports, just crunching numbers mindlessly day after day. And so the kind of person I am, I want to find out what your problems were. So I'd ask people. So most people around the water cooler, they're talking about the football game, they're talking about the latest movie. I'm like, hey, what are some of your challenges? What things are you dealing with? And they would talk about, they're complaining about this terrible process, this terrible system, grinding. And so I started creating Excel templates, Excel spreadsheets with macros that were helpful. Once my bosses saw that, they were like, hey, let's have you on here. So very quickly, I was able to transition closer to where I wanted to be. Eventually, I created apps that would crunch all of these numbers. So a day's worth of work, the program could do in 4 hours, but it would take them 5 minutes to set it all up, press a button, and now they can do something else, right? So every job that I had, including this particular one, I was hired for something else. The problem was this last job that I thought was going to be, at the time, I was dating my girlfriend, and we were going to get married, and she didn't want to live in Huntsville, and she was living in Atlanta, and I didn't want to live in Atlanta, and she wanted to go to law school. And so the options were to move back to my hometown, Maryland. I didn't want to go back to it. I was like, been there, done that. And so we were looking for places to go to, and Arizona, University of Arizona, looked attractive. So we went out there. We loved how it looked. We loved the scenery. They offered her a great scholarship to go to University of Arizona. So we moved out there, and my money was funny, right? So I couldn't just go transition into this entrepreneurial endeavor, which I didn't even know what it was. Like, was I going to do eBay, dropshipping? I didn't have my stuff together. So I go out there and I end up taking a position, another temp position, where I was hired, of all things, to be a Spanish technical editor. I speak Spanish fluently.
I do remember that now.
Yes. So they hired me to be an editor of these technical manuals for engineering. Right now, again, I want to go into computer programming, and I have all of these things on my resume, things that I proactively created. I wasn't asked to create them. I created them, so now I can put on my resume. So I'm like, this is where I want to go, but they hired me for this. It was supposed to be a temp job. I ended up spending 4 years there, right? After I said I was going to be done with the job, but the beauty of that was I figured out what business I was going to go into, and that was custom software development. Because this particular company, they gave me, after a very short space of time, I was still doing the Spanish stuff and whatever have you. They moved me to a place where I created full-blown apps. It would take these Word documents with all these graphics and everything and convert it to HTML websites. Just click of a button, set this up here, whatever. And I had like maybe a couple dozen of these apps that I created for them. And they wanted to promote me and put me in these lofty positions. And I was praying about it. I was feeling like I was being called to do this on my own, right? This was an engineering company. I was their entire software development department, and they were going to hire people under me. And I'm like, okay, I can do it myself. I can have database designers and graphic designers, and I can have testers and things of that nature. And so this itch was inside of me. So I started building my business. So I would work 8, 9, 10 hours a day at the job. And then at home, I would create some templates, and I would start working on my business and transitioning towards this particular date, some nebulous point in the future where I could do this full time and work with companies who had these complex processes and create custom apps for them. And I'm praying about it, and God's like, you need to wait. I'm like, no, I'm ready now. I had my speech ready for the owner's a small business, had a good relationship with the owner. I had my speech ready. I was going to go and talk to him. He's like, no, he's going to come and talk to you. And this is a guy who never comes into my office, right? But God was like, no, he's going to sit down and talk to you. So I'm just sitting, waiting. And one day, guess what? He comes in and he sits down. And that's when I tell him, I said, hey, Steve, you are an engineering company. You want to have, with limited real estate space, you want to have your seats filled with engineers and writers, not software people. So, and I would like to do this for my clients, including you, if possible. And he was just like, I don't want to lose you. So like, how can we work this out? So I was able to transition this client or this employer into my first client. As a matter of fact, they became my biggest client because all of their clients now became my clients. So I was contracting for them and for their clients a year. So that was my full-time switch from working for them to them being my primary client and all of their clients. And then very soon I was traveling for them, but I was traveling for me and my company. And so the software that I developed for them, we created a learning management system that was sold to all of their mining clients all over the world. And so now I would go and train people in South America and Africa and Kazakhstan, all over the place, to utilize the software, and we would do customizations, things of that nature. I even was able to negotiate a revenue sharing plan with them. Now, again, this is software that I had designed for them as an employee. And there's no reason why they should be paying me on the back end for something they paid me, but I was able to go in and negotiate and say, hey, you're selling this for a certain amount of price. Whenever you sell it, we get a percentage of it, and you pay me to travel and train on it. So it was a beautiful thing. That's what I was doing for several years. And then everything fell off because we had every intention, my wife and I, to spend only 5 years in Arizona. Her to get her law degree. You know, we bought our first house out there. We got involved in ministry. You know, we had our first child, but the goal was always to move back to the East Coast because all of our family's on the East Coast. And so she's been pressuring me about moving back. I didn't want to move, guys. I love the weather. I love the West Coast lifestyle. We had our nice house. We had a nice church family that got us involved in ministry at a young age. I'm like, I'm not moving. And she was like, just pray about it. And I prayed about it, and God said, yeah, it's time to move. So once we came back here, unfortunately, I did not prepare very well. I'll cop to it. I did not prepare to transition because my client, a lot of older people, we were using Skype at the time, but they never wanted to meet on Skype. They always wanted to meet in person. So once I moved over here, it was very out of sight, out of mind. They wouldn't get on Skype to meet with me. Workload just dropped, fell through, like the ceiling dropped. And so now I'm out here, I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Do I need to go and get a job? Because I didn't have other clients really locked and ready. And that's when I got introduced to Russell Brunson. And in fact, actually, it was Pat Flynn. You guys familiar with Pat Flynn?
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah. I think he was one of the first people I actually heard too. He's one of those. Yeah.
Pat was probably the first. So he had his passive income podcast. What's it called? I can't remember what it is. What is it called?
Passive.
That sounds right.
That sounds right.
Yeah, something passive life, something like that, whatever it was, came across this podcast. And so that's when I was first introduced to this concept of digital marketing. And so from there, Russell Brunson consumed his content, and I was really diving into this shift of going towards digital marketing. And again, prayer is a huge part of this story because I needed a mentor. I didn't have somebody that could really show me the ropes. And God put somebody in my mind, a business contact in Arizona. He said, go talk to this person. This somebody I had no idea was into it. Somebody who owned a very successful brick and mortar business owner. And we didn't even get to work together. Like I pitched him something and he never even took the offer, right? But we still had a good relationship. And so I reached out to him on Messenger and said, hey, I hope everything's going well. Do you know anything about affiliate marketing? And he said, yeah, I've been doing it for several years. How can I help? And so now this is great feeling like, wow, God has given me this testimony. He's given me this insight that I never would have gotten on my own. This is a confirmation. And then he stops talking to me. I can't connect with him for quite some time. And God's like, you can't do anything until you've connected. So months go by. And so now I'm still grinding with the software development business. And I'm like itching to get into this digital marketing space. When he finally gets back to me several months later, he gives me access to thousands and thousands of dollars worth of information, right? Like he just pours into me. And that's when I discovered Russell Brunson and Dan Henry, and Eileen Wilde, and all these people. Eileen Wilde was probably a little bit later, but that's when I really got involved. And Dan Henry was the one who inspired me. I'm so thankful I was able to meet with him and talk to him at the event. He's the one, even though I had the knowledge from Russell Brunson, he was the one who said, hey, you can be an agency owner. Like you can utilize these skills and actually service people who are trying to get their internet footprint out there. And so I had all this stuff ready to go. I was going to work with dentists. I was going to work with doctors. I was going to get them these ads so they can get these leads and they'll pay me $5,000 a month. And it was going to be perfect. And then COVID hit. Like literally right then is when COVID hit and all these businesses that I was going to work with were closed, right? And Dan was like, in his course, I remember his course, he had a couple courses. He had a Facebook ads course and 30-day agency. Yeah. He was like, don't work with the influencers. Don't work with the people with these long conversion periods. Work with the people that you can get in and out, get a lead in. And now those people that I was going to work with were out of business or they were closed down. And so now I ended up working with pastors. I had a podcast, still have a podcast, and I was fortunate to be able to have Myron on my podcast a year later. I was interviewing a couple guys on there. This particular person, he wanted to have a webinar for men. And he knew what I was doing. And he was like, hey, I would love to have you do this for me. And so once I worked with him and got him the results, he introduced me to all of his people. So all of these people all of them were pastors, ministry leaders, people of faith. And so that kind of opened the door for me to now use Facebook ads and creating landing pages and copywriting and things of that nature on a full-time basis. So that's kind of the long version of how I went from being a frustrated employee to eventually a frustrated entrepreneur in a space that kind of felt like it was dried up to now a place where I feel like not only am I using digital marketing skills, but I'm really ministering to ministers. Like a lot of the clients that I was working for are very big time pastors, men and women who have these big audiences, but while they pour into everybody else, nobody was pouring into them. So I'll get on with them and we pray over our calls and we talk about these strategies and I'm empowering them because most of these people have audiences where they're expecting people to give them their stuff for free. And so I'm challenging them saying, hey, no, your stuff is valuable, right? And so, yeah, it's been an amazing experience being able to minister and receive value in return.
That's so cool. And then you do affiliate marketing still on the side as well. Is that kind of how that works?
Right. Well, so the agency ended up being a detour because once I started that, like I kind of abandoned the whole affiliate marketing thing and was actually just creating and marketing offers for clients.
Yeah.
Nice.
Right. And so it wasn't affiliate marketing. And so affiliate marketing didn't really come back around until I met Myron. Right. That was a whole game change shift for me when I had him on my podcast. And I don't know if you guys know the story.
Probably not.
I invited him. Yeah, so I saw Myron on David Shan's podcast and joined the Make More Offers Challenge, was totally blown away. And I decided to make him an offer. I said, can you be a guest on my podcast? And
back when he doesn't do that anymore. So you
right,
got him
exactly.
before that.
Yeah. I got him before that. Yeah, he said, I think his stipulation was if you have 50 episodes, then. And the name of the episode was Biblical Blueprint for Success, right? And I said, hey, in the pre-meeting, I'm saying, can I have you promote my affiliate link for your challenge at the end?
Yeah.
And he looks at the title and he says, hey, I would bet my life if you go to GoDaddy or whatever have you, and you buy that domain, it's going to be available. What you do, you link that to your affiliate link, and then I'll say at the end of your podcast. So I went and while I'm interviewing him, I'm like doing all this stuff in the background. I bought the domain, I'm hooking it up, doing all the C names or whatever would have you. And so at the end, he says, hey, join the challenge. It's going to be in a few weeks. And he said the name and some folks bought. I was like, hey, that's pretty cool, right? And then I realized, hey, one of my challenges with affiliate marketing was being disconnected from the products that I was selling. So like a
Yeah.
lot of affiliate marketers, they're just selling stuff because it makes them a lot of money or it's got a high gravity score in ClickBank or whatever, but they don't really know anything about the product, right? Versus Myron is somebody that I've read all his books by this point. You know, I mean, I've been in this challenge. I'm just like, I can definitely promote this person. And I know I'm not going to promote something I don't believe in, right? I've had people say, can you run ads for me? I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I knew that there's someone of value, someone of an integrity, a man of faith. And so I was like, hey, how can I systemize this? And that's when you guys offered Golden Ops.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was several months, that's probably like April or May of the following year in 2022.
Yep.
And that was very life-changing for me because it wasn't just about, oh, I love Myron stuff and I can promote them to my friends. It was, what about the people who I don't know? And how can I systematically get those individuals to be connected to Myron, have the same experience that I had, and I get some commissions on the back end, right? And they have, and not even just me getting commissions, like people who I've introduced to, every one of my clients, all of my digital marketing clients, I would say maybe 85% of them, one of the first things I say, go join the challenge. And they're like, wow, their minds are blown. And so I'm getting the benefit of not just the commission money, about their transformation and how it's helping them better transform the lives of the people in their spheres of influence. So I believe when we're talking about affiliate marketing, it's not just about getting the commission. If you see transformation, that's where the real fulfillment comes in.
Well, and the cool thing about when you send them to the challenge, then you guys, when you're doing back end stuff for them or building stuff for them, you guys are on the same strategy plan.
Right.
Exactly.
And they have like the same
framework. Yeah.
So when you say something, they're not like, I have no idea. They have a place to put it, as Myron would say, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yes.
I have I have a place to put that context now.
So that's
an epic
that's
idea.
Actually super epic, because then you're like, yeah, and then it's beneficial for everybody and it's a win for everybody. That's so cool. So when you were telling your story, like a couple of thoughts came to my head that I want to point out. And one is the fact that I love the fact, and you're going to laugh at this, I love the fact that while you were an employee, you were actually acting as an entrepreneur.
Oh, yeah.
Like, and it's so funny. We talk about all the time, everybody's actually an entrepreneur. It's just some people only have one client, which is their job. Right. But then you were acting on it because you actually solved, like, what does an entrepreneur do? They just solve problems.
Yeah, you're solving problems.
Well, you did that for your one client, which was your job. And it just made you more and more and more and more and more valuable. So you were practicing entrepreneurship way before you were ever even an entrepreneur.
Exactly.
Officially.
What you were.
But you were.
Right.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
You're talking about entrepreneurship.
Yeah. But you were doing the entrepreneur thing while you were an employee. And that's the thing that so many people are like, I got to get out of my job. I got to get out of my job. And it's like, or you can start acting like an entrepreneur right now.
Right.
Go solve some problems for people.
Solve some problems. You probably get honestly, you probably get a couple raises in the process, even if you're intending on leaving, right? If you focus on them as a client and how you can serve them, you probably get a couple raises before you even bounce.
Did you do that consciously or unconsciously? Did you like realize what you were doing, or did you just do it?
So I had every intention of converting them into a client.
So you did it consciously.
And the thing about that company was, and I got several raises. It's funny you mentioned that. Yeah. I started treating them as a client. Once I made it in my mind, I'm an entrepreneur and my employer is my client. And that made, I was going above and beyond, and I was presenting solutions to them as if they were a client, right? And so I'm making offers to them, even though I'm not going to get paid necessarily any more for it. The fulfillment was being able to do something that I knew I could do for another client, right? Exactly. I could create something that now became part of my portfolio. So my ability to present my value to a new prospect, a lot of the work I showed them was stuff that I created for this client, which happened to be my employer, right? Mostly the experience that I got from it. So yes, I would definitely say, instead of saying, yes, I got to cut the umbilical and just be free flying, definitely a transition from full-time employee to full-time entrepreneur, bridge the gap. Act like you're an entrepreneur now. View your employer as your client, and then go above and beyond. Don't have this mentality, well, I don't get paid enough for that. Like the money is a byproduct. If you're just working just to get a salary, you're wasting time. You will literally be in a company for 10 years and all you did was make money and pay bills. At the end of the 10 years, all you have is just money? No. What are the skills that you acquire? That's the real payoff.
Yes, sir.
And so that's what I realized. Yeah.
That's a word right there. That's for somebody listening, like that is like literally that, like that's a like that mind shift, I think, is the number one mindset shift. Yeah, that people who are like I'm doing the side hustle and I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to figure it out. Like I think that what you just said is like the number one mindset.
Well, and even if you don't want to go get like a whole bunch of clients or run your own business, like just having that mindset will change your experience when you're at a job. Right. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't feel like this, like it won't feel like this terrible thing because you'll be looking at things differently. It won't be something that you have to do, it'll be something you get to do. And you'll be looking for problems. Right. And like people are going to praise you, even if like
you did that,
people steal credit from
you. Did that in the very first job you said you were at. You're at like in Alabama. You're like, hey, like what's your problems? What do you like? You know?
Yeah.
I used to do it too, like the Excel thing. I was laughing because you were like, I made macros in Excel for people so they can do stuff. That's what I did. I did it for myself, and then I would do it for other people because they're like, yeah, I got to get this report done and blah blah blah. And I'm like, yeah, but like 50% of what you're doing is just the same as last week. And if you make a macro, like you just dump it and do it all for you. Just click the button. So anyways,
I'm glad you said that because I want to talk about what you just said, Darien, is like skills, and it's all about acquiring skills. Okay. And you both worked in like a more corporate-y setting, different. He was at a plastic bag company, manufacturing company. And I know you worked in like engineering company and different things, but you both kind of like developed these skills that you now use in entrepreneurship. And I feel like sometimes people who are in corporate or in, in job settings, they go, online entrepreneurship, I don't have any skills in that arena. So what would you say about like how did you take the skills that you had and mold them into like something new? Translate them. Yeah. Like how did you was that a conscious thing?
I mean, to me, there's crossover. There was for me. So I don't know if there was for you,
was
but
it like a conscious thing for you? Like, were you like, oh yeah, I have skills, or was that something you kind of learned as you threw yourself into that?
Yeah. So I think people in a younger generation, they don't appreciate the value of how easy it is to research information. Like I'm telling my kids, like Google exists. Like we had to, like when I was trying to figure out macros, I had to go to the library, I had to go to bookstores, find all this information, and it never was exactly what I needed. Eventually we had forums. I had to search somebody asking the same question or me post a question and hope I get a good response. Like literally nowadays, there's so much, like you can learn any skill that you want on YouTube, on Google. And guess what? Here's the even better thing. Actually paying for courses, right?
I know,
so
right?
You can say, hey, I'm going to spend all this time in DIY, right? And you can go through and pour through the stuff. Or you can say, hey, you know what? I like this person's presentation. I like their material. Let me actually invest. So I would say if someone really doesn't have the technical skills, invest, pay somebody who has done it before. Most of these people that are successful, they don't have it. They're not brainiacs, right? They're not rocket scientists. They were just like you in bad situations. And they said, you know what? I'm tired of this bad situation. Let me learn how to get better. And so there are a lot of roadblocks that they went through that they're now successful, that you don't have to go through as many of them, but trying to get it for free or trying, like I've invested tens of thousands of dollars into my education, probably more, maybe close to $100,000 in coaching. And that is the best ROI. So if you don't know how to do something, pay someone who knows how to do, who can show you, right? That you can delegate some responsibility to eventually, like find some people that you, like if you don't know how to build websites, you don't have to know enough of the principles and then find someone on Fiverr, find someone on Upwork. Don't be afraid to research information. Don't be afraid to delegate, and definitely don't be afraid to invest either in your education or in paying someone who can do all the technical stuff. I think about this book. So this book, I remember I was finally doing the ebook version of it for the first time. And an Amazon KDP, it's kind of technical, and I could do it. I'm sitting there, and I think I gave the testimony on the challenge. We had a basketball game. I was taking my kids to a basketball game, and I really wanted to get this ebook done. And I could have spent 4 or 5 hours formatting this thing, getting it done, whatever have you. I found somebody spent like, I don't know, $7,500. Well worth it, who did a great job, and I was able to go out and enjoy time with my family, right? So we're sitting here trying to save money, and invest in this. I'm speaking to the choir. This is Myron says all the time. We are willing to trade our time, which is infinitely more valuable than our money, just to save a few cents, a few dollars. No, find someone who can do it, pay them the money, right? So that's what I would say.
That's really good. And it's funny, you took your dad's advice to heart then when he said, don't be afraid to let other people help you.
Yes,
That's really cool. Well, before you tell everybody like where they can find you and you know, if they want to learn more from you, I think you have some coaching programs as well. Before you talk about those, my last question for you, unless you have another question, I don't want to cut you off.
I do not have a question.
All right. But I wanted to know, like, what advice would you give to somebody? You touched on this, but what advice would you give to somebody who was in your position, kind of new as an entrepreneur, but not really like, they didn't really make it yet. Like they're still trying to figure out how to maybe become full-time, like make it so it's stable and it's really, they get to control their life and their time. Like, but they're sold in, they want to be an entrepreneur. They made up their mind. They made that decision. What is the best advice you can give to them?
Educate yourself. Spend as much time educating yourself. So when I was doing this transition, money was tight. You know what I was doing? I was Uber driving. And you know what I did while I Uber drive? I had my Bluetooth in. And somebody would get into the car and I could tell very quickly if they wanted to talk or not. So I say, hey, how's it going? You know, and then if they didn't want to talk, I would be listening. I'm listening to audiobooks. I'm listening to podcasts. I'm educating myself, a little notepad that I'll stop and make notes on. If they wanted to talk, fine. And I would learn from them, right? But like every chance I get, so many people, they consume entertainment. They're listening to music. They're watching all these shows. Like I've made this joke. A lot of my friends love the show 24. 24 came out quite some time ago. Never seen a single episode of it, right? If you see me talking about 24, you know I've made I'm like a multimillionaire, right? Because I'm the kind of person that would binge. I'm not just going to watch one episode, I'm watch the entire thing. And because I know that, and because my education and the goals that I've set for myself are more important, and I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to watch a single one of those. So I would say the time that you have, your quote unquote discretionary time, educate yourself. Audiobooks. Don't be afraid to invest in courses, things of that nature. Find people who have done it. Do the research. Find somebody, connect with someone like Myron Golden. I would definitely say go to his challenge. Like there's no reason to not be in his space.
We'll put a link in the chat too. So
yeah, definitely. Like that is, it doesn't matter what your business is. Doesn't matter if you intend to be a full-time entrepreneur. Like I was making money on the side. It's possible to do that. If that's what it takes to give you the comfort level to leave your job, if that's your goal, then do so, right? But don't allow the time that God has given us to be wasted with entertainment, right? I love how Myron says, you know, if you're broke and broke is making $50,000 or less a month, you shouldn't have a TV, right? I mean, you can think about the years of our lives that are wasted with entertainment, with things that we're watching other people live their dreams. So that's the main thing that I would say, educate yourself. And if anything, that inspires you to get more education. Like most people are not going to be able to build a business just by reading a book. That just gives them some impetus to find more information, to start implementing, right? The things that you learn, don't just let it be a nice read and then you go back to your regular life. Just like don't hear a good sermon on the weekend and then go back to live your regular life, because events don't change people. Books alone don't change people. Implementation of systems and processes, that's what changes. So I like to make a list. Like when I went to the Offer Master Live conference, I had some notes that I got, but I also had a list of things I can implement right now. So whatever it is that you're reading, whatever it is you're consuming, you have a list of some nice takeaways. What is something you can do right now? If you don't have that list, nothing's going to happen. So that's what I would say, getting to work immediately.
As Jeff would say, well,
that's a good word.
No, that's awesome, man. So if people want to connect with you more, like tell them where to find you, if they want to learn from you, where to learn from you.
Sure. Yeah. So my main page is claxtracksolutions.com. That's where you can see some of the services we've done. You can schedule a call with me. You can see some of the packages that we have. I'm also on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram. Don't use Instagram too much, but they can connect with me, Darien Claxton, on any of those platforms. And I love to connect. I'm passionate about ministry as well, so that's another space as well. But that's why social media exists, right? For us to connect, not to entertain ourselves, but to connect, to pour into each other, to serve others. So I'm looking to serve in those regards.
Love it. We'll make sure that we get all of those links into the description. So if you want to connect with Darien, you can do so below. And it's been a pleasure. I love listening to your story about shifting your mind, learning new skills, and just going and being practical and doing. And your life is a testimony that it can be done because you are doing it. And I love it. So thank you so much for sharing with us and everyone watching. And love it. So thanks everybody for joining us, and have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, guys.